training. Oh, and I should say as well, yeah, we are recording, and this will be hosted on Kate's website later on, but we're not going to record the Q&A at the end, just in case anybody feels a little bit shy. We want as many people to jump in at that point as we can. So yeah, so I'm a head teacher of a 3 to 18 all through school with just over 1,500 pupils in Aberdeen. And so it's the 5th school I've worked at. I've worked in Scotland, England, and in the Middle East. Like Kate, I've dabbled a bit in writing. So I've written for John Catt and Cambridge University Press, so textbooks as well as books on pedagogy and education research. And I'm a trustee of a charity called Remembering Srebrenica Scotland. I always try and mention them whenever I do things like this, because we try to do as much as we can to tackle prejudice and intolerance in society. So if you're interested in the work we do there, by all means, get in touch with me on Twitter. I'm at Robin_P. Kate, do you want to give yourself a little bit of a shout out?
Yes, I will. Thank you, Robin. Oh my goodness, there we go. And I'll put it on so that the recording people can see me as well. Hello. Yes, I'm like Robin, got a very similar path, and history teacher, former head of departments. I now work for Evidence-Based Education as Senior Associate for Teaching and Learning. So you might be familiar with their work that they've done with the Great Teaching Toolkit. I've authored a few books with John Catt, including The Teaching Life, and more on the way. So I'm really excited for this webinar. And as Robin said, this will be recorded, but not the Q&A. So how did Robin and I come together? I think that's quite a good starting point. Well, Robin co-authored a book previously with Carl Hendrick, What Does This Look Like in the Classroom? And that's looking at research. And I've always said, I wish that's what I called my book, because it's so brilliant. I was a big fan. And then Robin wrote the foreword to my book, Love to Teach. And we stayed in touch. And we'd been talking about CPD, career progression. We give each other advice and support. When we originally wanted to write this book, it was pre-COVID. And then when we started writing it, it was during COVID and after. And that really did shape the book, because professional learning, professional development has really changed in the last few years. Something that's a quote from Alex Quigley, but Andy Buck says this is a book of its time, because professional learning elements have stayed the same, but there's also a lot of change as well. So Robin, I'll hand it over to you about what we mean by the teacher life.
Yeah, I think this is a key concept to get across, because when, as Kate says, we started talking about this, it was very much about CPD. It was going to be a book about professional learning, but we started to realize as well that perhaps what has been less openly talked about is career development. So we started getting the sense of what it should be across your entire time in education. So from the first day step into a classroom to the last day when you kind of hang up the mortarboard and gown and sign off on the last email, and that is your teaching life. And for some people that might only be 4 or 5 years. For others it could be more than 4 decades. So how do you make the most out of that teaching life? And ideally what we'd like to see is a greater retention of teachers, because that obviously is a systemic problem in a number of different countries, recruiting and retaining enough good quality teachers to benefit education. So we'd hope that in writing this book, it's not explicitly about teacher well-being, but it's implicitly in every chapter about teacher well-being, because we firmly argue in this that if you are in control of your teaching life and you're making, as we say here, the right decisions at the right time for all the right reasons, it adds up to a happier professional existence and therefore a happier personal existence. So it is, as we say, implicitly about teacher well-being as you go along, but it's very definitely about agency, about being in control of your life in education.
There we go. The first, well, actually the book is split into 2 sections, and the first section is about professional learning, and this encompasses quite a lot. So this is what we're going to explore just to start off with. And I'd like you to write in the chat, and don't worry, there's probably no right or wrong answer. This is just
you're plugged in till the
sorry, can I actually put yourself on
take
mute?
out your projector.
Is it Hannah?
Here?
Can you put yourself on mute, please? Sorry. And can everyone write in the chat what you think all great teachers have in common? Okay. So I'll give you a moment to think about that. And I'm just going to put Hannah on mute. There you go. Thanks. This always happens on Zoom. So any responses? What do all great teachers have in common? Compassion, desire to get better, sense of purpose, best for their pupils, patience, kindness. Yeah. lots and lots of lovely qualities. We would agree with that. And this is something that we really wanted to explore with professional learning. And our answer to that question.
A lot of things there really that touch on values and mindset, I would say, and that's something we talk about in the book and we'll talk about today. But that desire to improve, we'll come to that in just a moment. It's really interesting to see that, and compassion, dedication, children's best interests at heart. It speaks to what we are as a profession. If you were to throw that out about people who work in insurance or whatever else, no disrespect to people in insurance, would you get those commonalities perhaps? And I think we have that part of our identity as teachers, that we're committed to all of those things.
Yeah, so that was our main answer, but we accept that there's lots of other responses. Like, great teachers never stop learning, whether you're an early career teacher or you're reaching the end of your career. And our next question was, what do all great schools have in common? Feel free to write any more comments in the chat about this. Self-awareness, willing to improve. That's really important, what Jackie said about safety. Because of course we know the priority is safeguarding. Now, our answer is all encompassing, but ultimately great schools never stop improving. And that's a key message, that actually we can have a great teacher who wants to keep on learning, but they will really flourish in a school that wants to keep on improving. Now, if a school does want to keep improving and striving to get better, it can only do that if the teachers in that school are willing to learn and develop. So they're not something that we view in isolation, but instead that they're really connected. And there's a little cartoon of Robin and I. Give you a moment to read that. So that's the key theme. There is the teacher and their own professional learning and what they can do as an individual, but then there is the whole school culture and attitude towards improvement and development.
And this is a quotation that would make no apologies for over messaging on. It's become very famous, and you come across it in lots of different talks. I think last time I went to a conference, I saw this 3 times in one day. No issues with that whatsoever, because it's absolutely true. All teachers need to improve their practice, not because they're not good enough, but because they can be better. Bill and William, who is somebody that Kate and I have a huge amount of professional respect for. And what this speaks to is that idea that there's no such thing as perfection in teaching. There's no such thing as perfection in education. So if we can never quite hit perfection, there's nothing to stop us trying to keep getting better at what we do. So see it as a positive. It's not saying that you're not good enough, it's that you can get better. And that's really quite exciting. And Kate and I are both big believers in having an intellectual curiosity about what you do, because teaching as an art form, as a science, as a craft, however you style it, is, it's endlessly fascinating. How do people learn? What's the best way to be able to teach, to maximize learning? That's something that no one will ever completely master, but we should definitely try carrying on to pick away at that. And that's what good professional learning does. And when we talk about the professional learning gap, our concern is that there's a gap that you'll see within perhaps your own schools as well, between those teachers that are really red hot in professional learning and they get this. They don't need to be told that Dylan quotation because they have that mindset anyway. And then others that are disengaged for whatever reason. It may be a lack of motivation. Maybe it's just they haven't actually had good enough professional learning in their own career. It can be a whole host of things, but they're not getting involved in professional learning, and they perhaps lack that curiosity. And they've got a different mindset where they just want to keep doing the same thing year in, year out, because as far as they're concerned, that's good enough. And actually, that should never really be good enough. We can always be evolving, because education is not a static thing. Schools don't stay still. Society doesn't stay still. I talked to my staff earlier this year about the societal changes that are going on around us that mean we have to change the curriculum, and whether that's Black Lives Matter or whether it's everyone's invited. There's a whole host of different things that mean that we need to look at our curriculum and make sure it's evolving, and that means professional learning is required. So that's what we mean by the professional learning gap, and we are hoping to try and close that gap as much as we can. If you worked in a school where everyone completely bought into professional learning, think what a great school that would be. And this is another diagram that's really important to us, and grateful to the Chartered College of Teaching for producing this. This was published initially in Impact magazine, but it's trying to get at the heart of what we mean by evidence-informed practice. I'm careful to use the term evidence-informed rather than evidence-based, because what you really want is to make sure that you have a good knowledge of the breadth of educational research that's out there, and you're not driven entirely by effect sizes or anything else. But the three things that overlap to get evidence-informed practice right is that you are looking at the best available evidence from research, keeping in mind there's some pretty bad research out there as well. So you've got to be able to have a quality filter on that. You then need to also apply that to your context, because what will work really well in one system might look very different in another. And you've got to think about it as well between the setting, the group, even down to the individual student. And then, of course, there's your professional expertise, your teacher judgment, your professional judgment that also informs that as well. We definitely don't want to say to teachers that you should ditch your intuition. You should also critically examine your own intuition as well, but that's an important part of this as well. So knowledge of research, how it applies to context, and your own experience. Put those three things together and you have evidence-informed practice. So that's the first perhaps thing to discuss or even think about individually is, in this diagram, does that work for you? Where we get on to barriers with engaging with evidence, and this was something that Carl Hendrick and I battled with when we wrote our book about 5 years ago about bridging the gap between research and practice, was that I think the biggest issue mainly is time. And one of the studies that we looked at in the book showed that there is actually a lot of money in professional learning in England, as there is in many other countries, but the biggest barrier is actually time, giving teachers enough time. You're supposed to be doing 35 to 40 hours per year of professional learning. Not enough teachers are getting that time. Access can be an issue. Quite a lot of research might be paywalled, or that it's perhaps whoever's leading professional learning within your school community isn't actually getting the best stuff that you should be looking at and discussing. Sometimes it's left to your own devices to go and find that, and that can be really tricky. Comprehension is another one where actually just being able to read education research, to be able to extract the key learning points from it, can also be problematic. When people are writing PhD theses or journal articles, they're not necessarily writing with a teaching readership in mind. So the audience is more fellow academics, and sometimes that can be a bit impenetrable. But as we'll see, there are many things that have happened in the last 10 years that I think have basically bridged some of that gap, which is great. And then, of course, you've got the application problem. If you have read a range of studies and you've got a really strong idea about something that might work as an intervention in your teaching practice or school, how do you make that happen? If resources are challenged, that can be one issue. If you don't have buy-in from the leadership team in the school, that can be another. There's an ethical issue about whether or not you start applying different methods in your classroom, and some people will feel that you're using your students perhaps as guinea pigs, and that's something you've got to make sure that you're not disadvantaging their learning in something that you're doing. So there's a few things to consider there. I think access, comprehension, and application can all be overcome by a combination of departmental leadership, school leadership, but the time problem remains a systemic problem that I think we need to think about on a national level. So some specific things that you can take away relative to what you've been talking about there. Providing more CPD time for staff, I think, is really crucial, and thinking about how you use inset days is really significant. We still have professional learning days at my school, and we do them as joined up over the years, so we have continual courses so that we can go deeply into different areas. We've set up professional learning pathways, so that's one way to not just provide more time, but maximize the use of that time. That's really key. Research summaries are great. You don't have to read an entire thesis. You can get stripped down summaries that are 2 or 3 pages long, that are actually written for a teaching audience, and still distill the most important findings that can apply in your classroom. So there's now a great range of those. I think the Dunlosky is a classic one. You're working at what works, and looking at different revision methods that students might use, what works and what doesn't, and something that you can actually give to students and they will read it and understand it. So research summaries like that are fantastic. Sharing great practice, we'll talk about professional learning, networks and communities later on, but there's a number of ways in which that has become far easier in recent years. Social media, or professional media, as I sometimes call it, is great for that. And PLCs, professional learning communities, if you're not involved in one of these, depending on what your age and stages or your professional background, this is something to see if you can get involved in as well, because Kate and I both enormously benefited from being involved in professional learning communities and networks. So time, yes, still can be an issue. So that's something that can only be resolved with help from the school leadership team, but all these other things as well, brought in as a holistic solution to the problem, we can definitely overcome barriers to being evidence informed.
Absolutely. And something that inspired Robin and I, there we go, in terms of when we were writing this book, was a tweet from Carl Hendrick that described this time at the moment that we're living in as a golden age of professional development. When we think about how professional development was a few years ago, and it tended to be a one-off day in a hotel with a nice lunch, well, we've really moved on forwards from that. And we wanted to unpick, well, is this really a golden age for professional development? And one of the elements that we explored, sorry, my laptop is being difficult today, is low cost, high impact professional learning. This is something else that we explored in the book about the economics of professional learning. To what extent does the school pay? And obviously every school has their own CPD budget, but we know teachers are paying for their own professional learning opportunities. But there's also things available, like this free webinar, for example, that can be low cost, either very cheap or free, but that can still have a high impact on professional learning. So here are some of these, and Robin refers to these that I'm going to share as the professional learning bingo. And some of these you might already be doing, others you might not. Now, it's likely if you join this webinar that you probably found out about it through social media. Robin and I were very active on social media. We actually became friends and colleagues through social media, whether this is Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. It's unusual to think of social media as a professional platform, but it's certainly gone that way in recent years. Robin's already touched upon the summaries. I also agree. The Dunlosky Strengthening the Student Toolbox, that's a great research summary. I could post a link to that in the chat, or anyone else can, but it's free to access on Google, as is Rosenshine's Principles of Instructions. And teachers are always writing blogs, reflecting on their day-to-day classroom practice, leadership. For me, I made the point in the book that blogs and social media tend to go hand in hand. So if you're writing a blog, then you'll use social media to promote it. And if you want to read blogs, social media is probably the best place to access that. This also links with what Robin said about time and time constraints. Well, a blog or a research summary can take 5 to 10 minutes to read, and it's definitely something that we should make a professional learning habit. There's also a wide range of books out there. Of course, we've been talking about our book, but if there was something specific that you were interested in terms of your professional learning and development, there's so much choice out there. And there's been some complaints on social media saying there's too many books. Well, actually, we have the power there. We've got the choice. We don't need to buy and read all the books. And we can also really make the most of these books that are out there by using our professional learning communities to act on their recommendations, to reflect on the books, to discuss the books. You might read a blog that is a book review. You might see a book that's promoted through social media. A Teach Meet is a free in-person or online event, or very cheap. And the idea is this is where teachers are presenting. Another example of this is there's research ed events. They are very cheap and they will often have experts presenting. I'm presenting at Robin's School or Research Ed Aberdeen. There's lots of things that are happening, but again, you've got to know where to look for them. And when I was international in Abu Dhabi, this was a frustration I felt. But as we can see here now tonight, we've got people from all over the world. So this is becoming more accessible with online webinars and recordings on YouTube and so on. There's also, of course, action research. If teachers have something that they are really interested in, that they wish to pursue that could have an impact not only in their classroom, but in their school further afield. Observation is so powerful, and it is something that we could do. It doesn't even have to be a whole lesson. And observation, I'm going to ask some challenge questions about this. This can involve inviting people to our classroom and being ready to seek feedback with a desire to improve. And this could be, can you come and look at one element of my lesson? It could be questioning, it could be a behaviour management issue, or it could be going to observe your colleague in your department, another department, or even another school. There's also lots of videos of teachers online. Something I struggled with is cold calling. That's a no hands up approach. And Doug Lemov has gone into classrooms, he's filmed teachers with their students, and he's put it on YouTube. And watching those teachers online through those videos really helped me. And there's lots that I could take away from it. There's also lots of podcasts now available focusing on education. Again, whether it's the science of learning or leadership, we can recommend lots of great podcasts that where you listen to on your way to work or when you're relaxing, or vlogs, short YouTube. These are things that we didn't have access to years ago, whereas observation is something, it's this idea of change and continuity. The professional learning network and professional learning communities, that could be great for various reasons. It could be a subject community. For example, I'm a member of the Historical Association. It could be a community that you have developed and that you're part of through social media. It could be within your local area. And there's so many benefits of a professional learning community. Not only can you learn from others, but you can support, you can mentor, you can share and collaborate, also help with workload. And this is difficult because, like what Robin said, everything comes back to time and sometimes it can be the money, but these are low cost. But where possible, visiting a school is really worthwhile experience. I'm very fortunate that between the months of January to June, I took time out of working basically to write a book. And during that time, I went to visit so many schools across the UK. And I was able to pick up on wonderful things that were happening in the classroom and have lots of conversations. And this is something that we really should be doing more of. So in terms of these low cost, high impact professional learning strategies, which of these have you embraced and something that you are already doing? And which of them do you think, actually, I should try that, or I could do more? And so as I've said, in our book, let's go for it, Robin.
If anyone wants to do a further session around using social media, because I think of the 9 there, that's probably one that might be most problematic or daunting for people to do. And we've been doing it for a long time, almost entirely a positive experience, but some negatives around it too. And there are ways, I think there's a few golden rules you can apply to make sure you make the most of it. And so it looks like quite a few people are keen for that one. So maybe we'll do that as a follow-up.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of social media, this links into this question, what is your purpose for social media? And I don't mind being very honest and direct, saying that I have used social media for professional learning. That was my initial goal. But now I do use it in terms of my career progression, because the things I do now in my career, which involve writing books and speaking at events, social media is integral to that. So social media, depending on what your purpose is, it could be that you want to blog and build up a platform and share with a wider audience, or it could be that you just want to be there to observe and learn and get ideas and inspiration. But that's a really good, we definitely could do that, Robin, and that's a really good starting point, is thinking about what is the purpose? Why do you want to use social media? And again, Robin touched upon this about the concerns we can have. Yes, it is a really difficult one, because if you have an open public account, and the golden rules that Robin has touched upon there, we basically say if your account is open, be mindful that a student, a parent, a governor, a future employer has access to all of this information. And Robin and I, we've spoken about this a lot. We've really tried to give advice to teachers because we see people criticizing their workplace on social media. And it's a difficult one because we do need to talk about the problems in the workplace and about issues with workload. And we do need to turn to each other for help and support. And there are ways that that can be achieved. But also, again, we've got to be careful that we're not putting the profession into dispute, that nobody gets in trouble in work and so on. So there is a lot to it. We can come back to that. But if you are using social media, what do you gain from it? Well, I've gained a huge amount, whether I've gained professional network and actually some personal friendships. It's helped me massively in my career. Where I am at this point in my career is largely due to social media. I was a teacher and head of department, and then I joined social media on the recommendation of a senior leader at my current school at the time. And then I started sharing, that led to blogging, that led to writing books and so on. So I've gained a lot from it, but what are you looking to gain? Have you already gained anything already? And we like to ask these challenge questions because reflection is a huge part of professional learning as well. Okay. Another professional learning option we spoke about is reading and how much choice there is. And how often do you read for professional learning? This is where I think the professional gap is really clear. You have some teachers who love to read, embrace reading, are always reading, and then others that do it sometimes, and then others that have openly said to me, I haven't read a book about education in years. Now, we want to promote a love of reading for the children that we teach, and we need to model that. And one of the reasons why Robin and I became friends is because I was trolled online because it was the summer holidays, or I was on the beach in Dubai reading Robin's book, and somebody called me sad. And there was a debate around that. Should you read in the summer holidays or not? And the answer is, of course, do what you want. If you find it a struggle in term time to read for professional learning, we do have a large amount of holidays. So we can and we should find time for reading. This is something that I wanted to include because it's something I need to work on. I don't vary enough the types of books and blogs that I read. I'm really interested in cognitive science and retrieval practice, and I try and consume all the content that is out there based on that. But I'm a classroom teacher. There's lots of other things I have to consider: behavior management, feedback, literacy, so many other things. So I know that one of the things I do read a lot, but I need to broaden what I read in terms of my professional learning. And this is where we try and promote a CPD library. But if a school has a CPD library, it should be empty and bare because the books are actually being read and not there collecting, like gathering dust. I was really disappointed. I worked in a school that didn't have a CPD library. And then I asked for a CPD library, and there was a CPD library created, but all of the books were really old and outdated. So I think with a CPD library, it's so important because obviously you're sending a message to staff that you value professional reading. But a good idea would be to ask teachers what do they want to read and order those books, and what books would they recommend that they've already read. Another suggestion I have is don't buy one copy of a book. I would have less titles and more copies. So say you have got 10 copies of Rosenshine's Principles in Action by Tom Sherrington. Those 10 members of staff can come together and discuss the book and reflect on it together. And also as well, that can help really link in if you've got a school priority and a school area for development. And as we said about lesson observations, is this something that you do regularly? And is there a culture in your school where it is welcomed, where there's an open door policy? It doesn't have to be a whole lesson, could be part of a lesson, but is this something that you are doing? And if so, great. And is it helping you? Or do you think it's something you could do more? Also, what about inviting, as I've said, what about watching online? There's lots and lots of content on there. Just go on YouTube and questioning in the classroom, cold calling, teach like a champion strategies. I highly recommend that if you haven't done that already. And just being open to invite others to your classroom. That is informal. It's developmental, not judgmental. And it's a real shame that most of my career, I associated a lesson observation with something linked to performance management and a grade. And it was never really a true reflection of me as a teacher. Sometimes it would be almost like a show lesson, or I'd be incredibly nervous and anxious. Whereas really, it just needs to be a process where both people involved, the observer and the teacher, can take something away from that. Over to you, Robin.
So we've talked a lot about low cost, high impact professional learning, but another big decision that a lot of teachers face is to whether to take on what we've called advanced professional qualifications. And there are kind of 4 big areas that we write about within the book. And I think the key question that we ask here is whether or not the juice is worth the squeeze, because they are hard work. And in terms of your career progression and the value it gets for you as an individual, as a practitioner, you got to think, is this actually something I really want to take on? Because it's undoubtedly tough. And Kate and I have done a bit of this ourselves, and perhaps worth sharing kind of 1 or 2 of our insights. But it was one of the most fascinating points of writing the book was speaking to people who had taken on APQs, how they'd gone about it and how it had developed them individually and how it had benefited them in their own progression, because you can do them for a number of different reasons. So national professional qualifications, one of the things we were really pleased about in delaying writing this book was that the NPQs got completely overhauled, and I think very much in a positive way while we were writing it. So actually, just as we were about to kind of go to press, they just launched again, and it was just really interesting finding out the rationale and the motivation behind that. So there's now a really different suite there, and I think one of the strengths about that is that it's not just geared at vertical leadership, in other words, going up the way to headship. It is about kind of leading across the whole school in a way that is more accessible to other people. So if any of you have got experience with the new NPQs, please do pop things into the chat room there, sharing some of what you have experienced with that so far. Master's degrees. So I did one of these, and Kate, have you started yours, Kate, or are you? I can't remember where you're at with it.
No, mine's on hold for now, but I'm totally with you with it's the juice worth the squeeze, because I've had a lot of options really to weigh up.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we found, which I think shocked us quite a bit, was the range of cost for master's degrees. That some of them cost more than 4 times. Well, the lowest cost one we found versus the highest cost one, there was a sort of 400% markup. So you've got to think very carefully about where it is you're going to do your master's and what you want to get out of it, and how are you going to fund that. That's really tough. And then leading on from that, PhD. I wanted to do a PhD. I finished the master's, and the aim was to go and carry on and do a PhD, and that would have taken me into working in universities. And I decided against it. I thought there was too much that I was going to miss about working in schools. And the advice I got from academics at the university I was in at the time all said that, look, it's tough, it's a lonely experience, and it could take you a long time to do, and there's no job security at the end of it. So you've got to go into this eyes wide open. And actually, I would say that for all the incredible benefit you get from doing a PhD, quite a few of the people we spoke to sort of said that, do you know what, I'm not sure it's been worth it. And Kate and I had a discussion with this as well. We both love to do a PhD, and I may well do one post, working in a school. I might do it as a sort of retirement project, but probably a good thing that I didn't do it. And we've written books instead, and we're quite happy with that. In a way, that's almost been the substitute for doing a PhD. And then there's an MBA. Certainly, when I first went abroad more than 10 years ago, MBAs were very much in vogue, and people were strongly encouraged to do it. Then they seem to be less in vogue. They are the most eye-wateringly expensive of the lot in terms of fees. And again, it depends massively on where you do it. Some are, tens of thousands of pounds. Others are not quite as much as that. But if you do it, are you going to get the benefit out of it? There's educational MBAs being developed now, which offer something that's probably a bit more bespoke and helpful and relevant. But you've got to think very carefully about that. Again, it's a really tough qualification to get, and there's a wide variety out there. MBAs from some universities very highly prized, and others not so much. So if you're going to take on one of these, have you got the time? Have you got the finance to do it? Have you got the support around you, whether it's friends and family or colleagues to help you get through this? And what do you get at the end of it? Is it actually going to help you in your career progression? Because after all, these are professional qualifications. You would like to think there's significant professional benefit from it. So I think this is a case of the mantra, by the way, throughout the book is always do your homework. If you're going to do APQs, do your homework. What are you going to get out of it? Talk to people who have done it before. Go into it eyes wide open.
Yeah, absolutely. And that links in really nice because the second part of the book is career progression. And they are, of course, linked and connected. But this was really important to us, that we didn't think ambition was a dirty word at all. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But also, career progression doesn't necessarily mean climbing up the leadership ladder. That is important. Robin, he is a senior leader. I've had experience with leadership, but you can still have career progression whilst remaining in the classroom and just ultimately trying to improve as a classroom teacher. So I'll give you a moment to read this from our book. I'll hand back to you, Robin, because Robin, you're the expert with the leadership out of us two.
Oh, I'm always worried about being called an expert on anything. But yeah, again, art, science, something else. Leadership is something that I've thoroughly enjoyed, and I should presage this as well as by saying that I've been a head teacher for just over 2 years, and I love it. It's my favorite job I've had so far. I've done a number of different leadership roles in pastoral, in academic, in co-curricular, and also operational, and those are the 4 broad areas I would say that you need to think about if that's for you. We're coming to that in just a moment. But in going into a leadership role, there's a huge amount of reward, but also risk. And one of the things that I came across when I was doing my headship qualifications at Stirling University was the complexity sciences. And I thought this was really fascinating because of all the different leadership books and research that I read during doing these qualifications, this is the one that spoke to me the most because it seemed to reflect my lived experience at that point as being a deputy head or assistant rector as I was. And this diagram sums it up at the risk of sounding a bit sort of Donald Rumsfeld, but it's looking at the different things that you're likely to come across and just the day-to-day cut and thrust of working in the school. Complex problems are where things will come at you that you're unexpected, unanticipated, and you really don't have a handle on them, and that's something that will happen to you all the time. So I would say that if you're going to leadership, it's that top left box there that is probably if you're not comfortable in that space, senior leadership may well not be for you. They're still complicated, known unknowns. The bottom right box, you'd love it if it was like that, but it's rarely like that. One of my mentors said to me that, as a head teacher, if you can go 3 weeks without having a major crisis kickoff, you're doing really well. I've not managed that yet. It's probably 2 weeks is as good as I've ever had it. And then, of course, there's the full-on chaotic. And I would say that having become a head in the middle of the COVID pandemic, it's definitely been probably mostly bottom left or top left that I've experienced in my leadership. But I'm the sort of person I quite enjoy a crisis. I like the management of it. I like the pressure and the adrenaline and everything else. And if that's something that's not for you, then you can get that at every level of leadership. So it's a question of when are you ready to take those next steps? And I think most people start to feel a bit of a sense of, I need a change. Actually, I've probably, I've been in the classroom long enough and I really enjoy it, but there's probably something more for me to do here. That's something new, a different challenge. And if you start to get that nagging feeling, it's time to start maybe thinking about this as a career step. Now, many people never get that feeling. Don't take on a leadership role if you don't have that feeling to start with. Too many people take on leadership without actually having the right drivers for it. And if you don't have the right motivation, the right drivers, you will not be a good leader. You also have to have enough experience. If you've just finished your NQT year and you think, great, when am I going to be head of department? Hold your horses. Make sure that you've got enough experience under your belt, especially if you're interested in pastoral leadership, because you do need to have been in and around a school, maybe more than one school, for enough time to see a complete range of problems there, because there will be some things that will be a common problem for a while, like eating disorders, for example, and then it might move on to something else. So it could be vaping or whatever else. So you're going to need to have been around long enough to be ready to lead at that kind of a level. And also the big trade-off is you teach less, you lead more. And I think the biggest step is actually from middle into senior leadership. So say head of department to deputy head, because that's the biggest fall off in your teaching load. And that can actually be a really difficult cultural transition to make, because after all, we all come into this because we love being in the classroom. So you've got to be ready to make that compromise. I still teach as a head teacher. I love it. I would never give it up, and I miss it greatly. It's worth it because I love doing the job I do, but you have to be ready to teach a lot less. And then also, I think the biggest difficulty there can sometimes be, depending on your role, of course, are you ready to lead adults as well as pupils, your colleagues? And I say this, a lot of people will say this as well, sometimes it can be a lot harder to lead adults than to lead pupils. It's a totally different ball game, and I think a lot of middle leaders struggle with it because they haven't had enough training in HR, and that's a really key part of the role. And capacity to increase workloads. Most teachers will think, I work every hour God sends, I can't do any more. And then you step into leadership role and discover there is more. And then you move from middle to senior leadership, and guess what? There's more again. You just have to find ways to manage the workload. And key to that is having the ability to delegate. If you are the sort of person that can't delegate and you always think that to do a job properly, do it yourself, you're going to break yourself as a leader within a term. No doubt about that at all. So you have to be good at developing a team that wants to take on responsibility around you, that you can share that workload with, you can work collaboratively with them. If you have a command and control style, I think that mitigates against good leadership. That's my own take on it. Be interested to see if any of you agree with that statement. And also, I learned this certainly as a head of history, delegate the good stuff. Make sure that if you're giving a responsibility to other colleagues, that they're taking on things that are really interested in, that will develop them to. Don't delegate the rubbish. You've got to be sure that you roll your sleeves up and do it yourself. So one of the things we talk about, which we really wish that we'd had this as a book early in our career, was a chapter about how you actually go about applying for jobs and dealing with the interview process. So securing the right role in leadership is, in the first instance, thinking about what's the right space for you. What I would say is, if you want to get into headship, it helps if you've done something across all four of these areas. And one thing to consider, which is one of the reasons I actually moved on to school, was that I felt that the senior leadership positions were quite siloed. If you were in the academic sphere, you were only an academic. You didn't get a sense of the other things there. And that can be really difficult, because if you then move from that into headship and you haven't done enough pastoral, co-curricular, operational, then those are blind spots you get. And that can be really difficult to try and learn that once you're in headship. So try and think about, how do you get that range of experience, and where do you want to start? Start with somewhere that you will be strong, but then develop additional strengths as you go along. Really important, all this coaching, mentorship, and sponsorship. So we talk about these three different elements. Coaching, everyone will have heard of coaching. Obviously, you've probably had some coaching yourself. It's now become really commonplace in education in a way that wasn't maybe sort of 5 years ago. But I think it's really important for leaders to get that coaching. It's a great way to be self-reflective and evaluative of your own performance as a leader. Mentorship means actually having somebody who is experienced in a leadership capacity, and they can talk to you about specific things and give you advice. And the third key element, which is less spoken about, we include in the book, is sponsorship. And sponsorship is actually where somebody almost takes you under their wing. It's not a formal thing. It's somebody who might recognize talent and motivation in you, and that they are an ally. They lobby on your behalf when you're not in the room. And actually, that might sound like cronyism, but it's not. When sponsorship works really well, it's because somebody is genuinely trying to challenge you and develop you, because they think it's right to encourage you to move into leadership. They think you've got the qualities that it takes, and they will advocate a bit on your behalf. And sponsorship can be a great thing, especially for inclusion in leadership. So for women, for people in ethnic minorities, sponsorship can be really powerful. So actually, if you are in that kind of a role of a senior colleague, think about being a sponsor. It's a great thing. And then timing and preparation. A lot of people will jump at a chance because it pops up in the middle of the year when they're not expecting it. It comes their way and they haven't really thought about it. They haven't done professional learning. They haven't done enough reading. The CV is not prepared and they come into it half cooked, and that shows up very strongly at interview. Think ahead. Don't wait for the opportunity to arise before you start planning for it, and make the timing work for you. If you get bounced into a leadership role when it's not the right timing for you, you are going to find it very, very hard. Be ready for it. Be in control of the timing. And context is key. Don't take on a role that is in a school that might actually end up being the wrong one for you. Or it depends entirely on the team around you as well. If you're joining an SLT where the culture is a bit toxic, then that can actually completely kill your love of leadership. So think very carefully about the role you're taking on and what's happening around that. I was once given a great piece of advice the first time I ever thought about going to a senior leadership position. The guy leaving the role had said to me, there's some changes coming. They're not all positive. I think if you went for this job, I think you could do it, but you'd be setting yourself up for being very unhappy. So I went away and thought about that and decided not to apply for the job. And again, look back on the sort of sliding doors moment as being, thank goodness I didn't, because that would have been a difficult one. So context is absolutely key. Again, what we said earlier, do your homework.
Okay. Well, Robin, this is where I do differ from you, is that I didn't enjoy my middle leadership role that much, actually. And in terms of career progression, I am really ambitious, but not necessarily for school leadership. And this is why we decided to have a balance with advice for teachers who do want to pursue leadership. But actually, there are alternatives. There's alternative options that don't involve the school leadership and reaching up to senior leadership. So these are just some of the things. Now, some of them will vary. It depends if you're associating career progression with more money, then some of these are not applicable. Or if you're associating career progression with satisfaction, or perhaps helping and reaching out to a wider audience. But these are just some of the ways you can become a blogger or an author. Now, Robin has managed to do both with leadership. I consider myself now a writer. I'm a regular writer, and it brings me a lot of joy writing about education. And I prefer that far more than I did being a head of department. I've also branched out into consultancy. So I go and I work with schools, I lead CPD sessions, I work with heads of departments. That's also incredibly rewarding, something that I thoroughly enjoy. And there's quite a lot of consultants out there, and it can be something specific. So for me, I tend to work with schools focusing on retrieval practice, but there's other consultants who focus on behaviour or coaching and so on. Being a governor is an element of leadership, but that could be a governor in your school or outside. I was on the advisory board of a different school. I gained a huge amount of insight, and I was really happy that I was able to play a role in the decision making and support the principal. An inspector, because of course we want inspectors who are there observing schools, lessons, making judgments. It helps if they do have a background in education. I've already touched upon this about consultancy, leading with CPD, whether that's webinars or whether it's linked to the books and speaking at events. Something else that I do is I set up my own podcast, and that's fantastic. And for me, all of these things are linked together. So for example, what I talk about on the podcast and in my consultancy is also what I write about in my books. I've been an examiner. I was an examiner for 5 years. This was a fantastic professional development opportunity, gave me real insight. It improved my teaching, but it did come at a very high workload. And sometimes the pay isn't always great. So there's pros and cons to each of these. The same with being an author. Royalties are probably lower than you would imagine, and you've got to sell a significant amount of books, but it can be profitable. Or a trustee. So again, maybe these are just some things that you have thought about or that you haven't, that you could consider in the future. So a few of our challenge questions, and I'm going to go through them quickly because we're trying to finish on time with question and answers. But have you tried writing about the classroom practice of any aspect of education? I personally recommend it. I find it great for reflection, and I find it just thoroughly enjoyable. If you do enjoy writing, maybe you could set up your own blog. It's not as hard as people often think. And in our book, we give advice how to set up a blog, how to write a blog, how to share it. If you are a blogger, maybe the next step for you is writing a book. There are more and more books now being published by people like Robin and I who are in a school environment. Public speaking. Oh, sorry, someone needs to put themselves on mute. I can hear the background. Do you enjoy public speaking? If so, start off going to events, signing up to speak. This could really help you internally if you actually do take on a leadership role, or this could be something that you do externally, and this could be online. We've just set up an Eventbrite page and sent out a Zoom link. Again, it's much easier than people often think. Same with a podcast. If you go on Anchor, that's what I use for my podcast. And I don't even have a guest on my podcast. My podcast, I chat for 20 minutes about a topic of my choice. Other podcast hosts invite somebody in, they have a conversation. The Craig Barton Maths podcast is incredibly popular. He has thousands of listeners, he has sponsors and advertisers, and then that's obviously led on to other things. And as I mentioned, becoming a governor, working at a school or a different school could be a real eye-opener, whether you want school leadership or not. Obviously, if you go into school leadership, then you will be on the governing board as well. So Robin, we've got about 5 minutes, so I'm going to hand it over to you to just finish off. This is some big life decisions in terms of the teaching life.
Yeah, this is very much the snowflake on the tip of the iceberg approach to this, but we've got bigger chunks within the book about it. But interesting things that you might want to decide to do during the course of your teaching life that definitely require a lot of planning, a lot of thought, and thinking about how you get your work-life balance right is key to that. But working abroad, Kate and I both worked abroad, loved it, thoroughly recommend it. I do think it's something that there's not many people I would say don't do it. You will certainly have less security, shall we say, both from a professional point of view and a personal point of view, go abroad. So you've got to be willing to take a bit of a risk and really cope with some difficult situations. To give one example, I mean, when I went abroad, 2008, and we didn't have the same kind of support through Twitter or anything else that you get now. So it's harder for me to do my homework, but I was relying on the school to tell me what exactly was going on. And when I arrived there, I found they hadn't actually finished building it yet. So that was probably a key part of the story that they should have told me. But never mind, I mean, working abroad, it's great, but I think it's got a shelf life. Some people go abroad, stay abroad, spend their whole career there. I think Kate and I both felt that it was great for a while, but we still wanted to come home. So there was that sense of okay, let's get as much as we can out of the experience. But one of the key tips we give is have an exit strategy. How do you get back home? And then with the different teachers that we interviewed as well, there are pros, there are cons, but it is a great experience, and it's something that we'd be happy to talk about a little bit more again if you feel that there's a separate webinar to be done around that. Planning maternity, paternity leave, great to see some changes around paternity actually, but again, that's a different session that we could perhaps do. But it's making sure that, again, timing of things, sometimes you can be in control of that and sometimes not, but these things should certainly not get in the way of your career progression. They should be something that should work hand in glove with being a really great teacher. Sort of family life and getting that right is something to make you really happy, and it should also benefit your career as well. You should be able to make all of that work. So I think we talk about the maternity, paternity CPD project in the book, which is fantastic. So there's a lot of support there for people who are going through that, and it's where, again, having a good network around you can really help you through what can be a difficult stage, but if it's handled well, it can be absolutely brilliant and even more fulfilling. And then the perfect discipline. How do you end your career in the way that you want to, on your terms? And I think that's really difficult. There's far too many people that leave feeling disillusioned or let down by the experience that they've had. And if you can actually finish your teaching career in your own terms, it's brilliant. I mean, imagine going off into retirement feeling that, yes, I absolutely loved it, and it ended at the right time in the right way. You know, that's the dream. And it's true for everyone, whether you're kind of head teachers or classroom teachers, it doesn't honestly matter. Financial planning is a big part of that, of course. You know, are you going to have to work all the way to your late 60s, or can you go any earlier than that? How do you balance things like your pension with property portfolios, anything else, to make sure that when you do retire, you're not worried about money and that you can enjoy your retirement because goodness knows you'll have earned it. So that can be challenging. Working abroad, you don't end up in the teaching pension scheme anymore, so you've got to think about alternative arrangements. So that's kind of where those two things can perhaps come together. So, you know, we're really skimming over this right now. Bigger parts of them are in the book, but again, if anybody would like us to do a follow-up webinar on any of those things, please let us know.
Yeah, so I can hear someone. I've tried to put everyone on mute. Someone is in the background, but there is an overview of the chapters that we cover. We've touched upon some of these, but please do put in the chat if you would like us to explore any of these. And these are the factors, whether it's international, non-leadership, leadership, the art of reflective practice. Robin wrote some chapters, I wrote some, and then we combined and edited them together. But I love the art of reflective practice. Robin wrote that, and it's a great chapter. So there is a QR code if you are interested, or if you've read the book. We would love to have your feedback, because it was a labour of love, something we invested a lot of time in. Robin went away in Scotland into the hills to go and do some writing. I was in Abu Dhabi. It was Aberdeen and Abu Dhabi at the time. So yes, there it is. It is available. But thank you for listening. I'm going to stop recording now. And the people who are watching the recording, you can get in touch with me by the Eventbrite page and send me any of your questions to Robin and I.